Pero yo vivo aquí en España por un montón de años, pero mi español es mucho peor que mi inglés. So, perdona, pero yo hablo hoy en inglés y perdona por eso. Factum Arte started in Madrid in 2001, as Miguel just said. And when we started, I was working with Manuel Franquelo, a Spanish painter, and it was a very small group of people. In the 17 years since, it's grown into a very large workshop that's really a playground for artists. So what we've tried to do is create an environment where all the barriers that tend to stop people working with new technology are broken down. And artists now from all over the world come and discuss how to make ideas into deeply articulate objects. And I mean, it is a magical environment, and it's somewhere between the airport and the center of Madrid. We do welcome visitors, so if any of you would like to come, it can be organized. But it's a different type of workshop. It's a different model where technology and craftsmanship go absolutely hand in hand. At the same time, all the way through the development of Factum, we've been applying the same technologies to record cultural heritage. And for me, the most important issues that are going on at the moment are all about high-resolution digital recording of objects of the past, about understanding the relationship between originality and authenticity, about understanding how objects change over time and why they look like they do and how we read them. So for me, the most beautiful thing about an object from 2,000 years ago in Egypt is you can read it with extraordinary detail. You can get inside the head of the people who made it. You can understand many of the thoughts that went into the production of that object. And if art is really important, it's because of this level of communication that comes out of the objects that we're dealing with. I mean, I think that's as true with contemporary objects as it is with historical ones. So Factum is very much working across time. And we're trying to identify how the technologies of today are going to influence and shape the way objects, both contemporary and historical, are seen in the future. So what I'm going to do this morning is run through a series of images relating to an exhibition that we put on at the Antiken Museum in Basel that finished about a month and a half ago. Then I'm going to look at a few projects that are ongoing that touch on some aspects of how technology is changing the way museums think and function. So if I had to sort of bring up just a few key points at the beginning, I've already mentioned the relationship between originality and authenticity. For me, this is something very, very important and needs a vast amount of work. I think really the ownership and custodianship of objects and the data that can be derived from them is absolutely critical. So I was with UNESCO last week, and we're desperately trying to formulate a new policy with the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Perry Foundation about data ownership. For me, it's absolutely vital that all the data derived from and recorded from objects belongs to the custodian of that object for all current and future commercial gain. It's a very, very important point because a vast amount of money is being poured at the moment into AR, VR, MR, different ways of thinking about how we'll experience data. And I think there's something critical now that museums and the people acting as the custodians of work of art keep that data for commercial purposes, but at the same time make it freely available for study and knowledge. So one of the things that's really changed is that museums occupy local places, but actually now their reach is global. And you're seeing more and more museums follow from the Met to the Rijksmuseum, following policies of free access to high-resolution scans of the data they hold. And I think this is a fundamental, a cause of fundamental importance for museums to ensure that people all over the world can understand what's in that collection. And what everyone is finding is, of course, that the visitor numbers to the museums go up. So by reaching a global audience, locally you also benefit. So there is still this incredibly important relationship between a visualization of something on a screen or increasingly in a virtual environment and the physical object. In a way, what Factum does is constantly blur that relationship, and I hope I'll show you in just a second. But I think it's in this new world where most of the museum directors, well, I suppose if I rewound a second, last week I was having a meeting with someone who's been charged to rethink the Pushkin Museum. And the Pushkin, like many museums, is going to be opening a new space. And they want to target the young generation now. So every child in Russia goes to the Pushkin Museum once during their school days. And what they're trying to do is to think what a museum can be to really attract that generation. But she was someone who was from marketing and was talking to me about the fact that most museum directors are baby boomers. Her generation is Generation X. And they're talking to the millennials, but her target audience are the digital natives, who are people born after 2005. And I sort of get this funny pattern that the people leading museums are often very far removed from the technologies that the digital natives, I think it's such a wonderful term, that the digital natives are totally happy to experiment with. So, by way of a preamble, the exhibition Scanning SETI, the regeneration of a pharaonic tomb, was at the Antiken Museum in Basel. It's a show that is really the culmination of work that's been going on over 17 years. And it begins in a very conventional way. So the first room in the exhibition is, like many bits of museumography, it's an introduction. It introduces the main characters. It introduces Belzoni, who's this wonderful Italian giant who 200 years ago discovered the tomb of Seti I, or perhaps he didn't. So most stories are never quite what they seem. And what we tried to do throughout this exhibition is to take objects, some of them real, most of them replicas, and to turn those objects into complex subjects. So in each room, we're trying to unpack stories that allow people to understand why these objects are important. In 1817, on October the 16th, 1817, Belzoni wrote that he'd discovered the greatest tomb. It's still the most important tomb in the Valley of the Kings. It's important because it contains the complete books of the dead. So the tombs are really libraries, and the libraries contain the knowledge of what happens between the time you die and the time the following morning when you're reborn. So it's the journey through the dark hours of the night to rebirth the following morning. Belzoni was a man of his time. He was originally a circus strongman, then he sold water pumps, then he worked for the British Museum, then he discovered the tomb of Seti, and when he discovered the tomb he realized that no one would be going from London to Egypt, although clearly he's part of the reason why people do now. And so he decided to make a facsimile of the tomb of Seti I. He took wax casts from the wall that pulled all the paint off. He made an amazing facsimile that was shown in London in 1821 and really triggered the whole of the interest in Egyptology at that time. His exhibition began with a model of the tomb of Seti I that was made quickly by hand. So we began with a model that was 3D scanned, is accurate to about 1 millimeter, and was reduced down to a small scale. It's about 5.5 meters long, and it's split in half, so it's really a glorified doll's house. And you can walk down through the middle of it, and the lighting is as it is now, the tomb is presented as it is now. And in this first room we played a number of games. So there's video data, video modeling, there's a beautiful little peephole that allows you to look through to a later part of the exhibition and see the character of Seti I. So we're constantly playing games with time and with different types of presentation of data. The curtain that hangs, that blocks off the rest of the exhibition, is a complete fiction of Belzoni's. So when he published the tomb, he said this was the entrance, but it never existed. So the curtain you walk through is itself an illusion. And you walk through the curtain into a room which uses the data we've recorded in the tomb, which I'll talk about in a second. It's in relief, it's a scale of 1 to 1, but using the watercolors that Belzoni produced, we recolored based on the knowledge of all the existing pigments and the way the paint was applied, the entire Hall of Beauties. So the what if that we were trying to achieve was, could you get a visitor to walk into a facsimile in a museum in Basel and feel some of that excitement that was felt by Belzoni as he walked into a perfect tomb in 1817, illuminated only by candle. So that first room, there were candles for people to walk through. There was very little lighting. And as you pass over it, you get this extraordinary sense of the relief, of the character of the figures, and of the character of the paint. So there was, in the workshops, there was an obsessive period of research, many years, into actually how Egyptians apply paint. Because if you don't understand that, you can't understand actually the character of the surface you're looking at. We have the color data because Belzoni knew that his wax casts were pulling all the paint off. So him and a man called Alessandro Ricci made detailed drawings and watercolors of all of the paintings in the tomb. They're not the most aesthetically beautiful drawings, but they're very accurate, they're very detailed. He's very good on his hieroglyphs, even though he couldn't read them. He's very good on his colors, but he couldn't resist doing more than one color variation. So he sometimes changes the colors of the headdresses of the pharaohs because he decided they'd look better in light and dark blue rather than in black and orange, black and gold. So there's a sense where he's imposing his perceptions onto the objects, even very early on. But you come out of that first room into a room that's of watercolors, so it's lit by museum standards. These are all original, borrowed from Bristol City Library and from the British Museum. There's very low lighting with gated windows, so only the images are illuminated. and you're in a space where all of the text panels on the wall tell you that the tomb was in perfect condition when Belzoni discovered it. So everything that's had to happen to it to put it into its current state has been done in the name of preservation. So it's a very, very important issue, and that's really what the exhibition unpacks. So an example of Belzoni's watercolour, almost certainly done by Ricky, and an example of how that gets transferred into the facsimile. 100 years after the tomb was discovered, the great Harry Burton, the amazing photographer, photographs the tomb, and you can see the condition. The big hole is where, you can see the condition in about 1920, and you can see the condition in 2017. So over the different periods of time, 1817, 1917, 2017, you've got three very different objects. And the exhibition was unpacking this change. For me, this object is much more honest than this object, where all the damage has been filled in, where it's been cleaned up. What you can do if you've got good recordings. So in this case, we have Belzoni's drawings, very good recordings. We have Harry Burton's photographs, very good recordings. And we have Factum Arte's 3D scanning and high-resolution color, which allows us to really analyze what's happened to that surface. It allows us to talk to all the experts in museums around the world, and it allows us to basically understand that tomb. The 3D scanning work that's going on now is not primarily going to be the subject of this talk, but it's really what underpins it and what is the very important part of Factum Arte's work and Factum Foundation's work. So the laser scanners that you see working here are built entirely in Factum's workshop in Madrid. They're programmed in Madrid. They were built specifically to record this tomb and to record the surface of paintings. We've been working on the design of this scanner since 2002. It was finished really in 2008, and it's still the best quality scanner for recording the surface of paintings. I hope if I gave this talk in a year's time, I'll be able to say we've superseded it. And now with photogrammetry, we can match the data that we can get from this scanner. So new technologies are often not as new as they seem. And photogrammetry began in 1852. So the first photogrammetry was done very close to the invention of photography. We're working with a team of Egyptians. So we're transferring the skills. So Alia Ismail on the left, and in this case it's Musa on the right, are working to record the tomb, always with someone from Factum. But Alia now can build a scanner from scratch. She can write the software. She can repair it in the field. She can operate it. She processes the data. And every stage of the process can now happen in Egypt. So I think unless there's a transfer of skills and technologies that empower the local community, there's very little hope of getting real preservation to happen. One of the battles we have all the time is because very few people understand the difference between data that's viewed on a screen, visualization of data, and data that's rematerialized. I spend most of my life being told that the work that SciArc is doing or other people are high-resolution recordings. The simple truth is most of the things are done using LiDAR scanners, which are what Google Earth uses, or Street View is done with LiDAR scanners of one kind or another. The highest resolution possible with a LiDAR scanner is on the left of this screen, and what we record with Factum scanner is on the right. One is very useful and very important for screen-based visualization, and the other can be downsized for screen visualization, but can also be rematerialized as an exact facsimile. The first exact facsimile we made, which was shown at the Museo Arqueológico Nacional in Madrid and then at various other museums, was the tomb of Tutmosis III. I made this tomb with Factum's first team in 2002. It's still one of my favorite objects that we've produced. It's about 16 meters long, about 9 meters wide, and about 3 meters 60 high. And when you're inside it, it's a completely visceral immersion. The second major facsimile we built, which has been installed into the Valley of the Kings, at the entrance to the Valley of the Kings, is the burial chamber of Tutankhamun. And it was from the data that we recorded in the tomb of Tutankhamun that in 2015, Nicholas Reeves published a paper claiming that he'd found an opening that goes through into what he expects to be the tomb of Nefertiti. So the data that's being recorded is vital for academic study. Nick Reeves was based at the Met when he did his work on our data over the internet, but he was able to study that data in the Met in more detail than the team from the Getty was able to do on site. And I'll explain that to anyone in greater detail if you like, but if you can have different ways of presenting data, so you can separate the relief from the colour, which you can't do in the original tomb, you suddenly see it very, very differently. And some of you may have been following the controversies that have gone on since 2015 about the possible discovery of Nefertiti's tomb through the north wall of Tutankhamun's tomb. And what I can say is science is always a negotiated thing, just like art. And there's a lot of discussion going on. All of the recordings that have been done imply there is something behind the north wall, but the politics need to align to get people into agreement before anything is done. So Belzoni's watercolours, there the tomb is being destroyed. The second, or the fourth room in the exhibition is a room of the fragments. So Champollion, the great decipherer of hieroglyphs, ripped out this panel, which is now in the Louvre. Rossellini ripped out this panel, which is now in Florence. The whole of the room is filled with fragments. Some are original and behind glass. One is original and is not behind glass. The rest are facsimiles. So at the end of the room on the right, you have a corner of a column that was taken by Lepsius and is in the Pergamon. The tall side of a column to the left at the end of this image is a facsimile. The corner of the column on the right is an original object. So it's one of the few times when we've been able to put and declare an original object and a facsimile that have the same restoration history side by side in a museum space. And there are differences. I mean, I can see differences, I know them. But for the visitors, unless you read the labels, the experience of these two things is identical. So thinking about this relationship between originality and authenticity is actually something that I keep coming back to, but is really rather important in how this exhibition works. To rip a fragment out, and I'll do this very fast, you have to hack out a big hole to take out a little fragment. That hole there was to remove that part there. So you lose about a square meter to remove something about 30 centimeters across. So the next room, which is, if I'm being honest, my favorite in the exhibition for a number of reasons, plays a number of games quite subtly. So the big grey wall is actually a three-dimensional rendition of Harry Burton's photograph made from the data we recorded and the photograph that he took. Egyptologists always talk to me about taking squeezes. So what Belzoni did was take squeezes. That means a cast. You either do it with wax, or you do it with plaster, or you do it with paper. And so we basically set up this wall, made it monochrome grey, and took a wax squeeze, and in front of it is its positive and negative, a plaster squeeze, and in front of it is its positive and negative, and a paper squeeze. And there's a video that explains the damage that each do. So this is what I love about practical things. In theory, you can read it, but in practice, you need to deeply understand it. And at the end of the room, so I'll do this very quickly, is the Holy Cow. It's one of the great images in the tomb of Seti I. Because it's so important, it was squeezed more than the others. And using projection mapping in a very subtle way. So again, most of the things that happened in this exhibition are deeply subtle. It very slowly goes from as it looks now to as it looked in Belzoni's watercolour. So we're remapping the colour back onto the relief. In this room, there's only one original object, which is in the glass case. But that was there for the reason I showed you just a second ago. We wanted to explain how you removed bits of the tomb and what happens. Wonderfully, with the British Museum, with Marcel Marais, he unearthed two fragments in a private collection in England that were removed from the tomb of Seti I in the 19th century, and we identified them to the damage that was on the wall of Harry Burton's photos. So these are two facsimiles of fragments shown against a photograph by Harry Burton in their original location. And I think the great sense that people got from this was starting to understand physically and viscerally what it was like to be in that tomb, how they thought, how they valued these objects, and how they brought them back to England and how they were valued in England. So if any of you know the Antiken Museum, the space we're in at the moment is a 1980s modernist interior, which we completely transformed. In this photograph, you get a glimpse of it on the ceiling, but actually when you're in the space, you virtually don't notice where you are. And what I loved was a lot of the locals who know the space very well got completely disorientated as they went around the exhibition. But this is a room where we tried to create the mindset of somebody like Sir John Soane, who built Sir John Soane's Museum in London, and who is the proud owner, of Seti I's sarcophagus. So down in the crypt in Sir John Soane's museum is probably the greatest single Egyptian pharaonic object, which is the alabaster sarcophagus carved in a single white block of alabaster and inlaid with blue infill. So when it came to England, I want you to think white sarcophagus with blue infill. I tried to record Seti's sarcophagus in 2001 and we failed. Alabaster is one of the most difficult things to record at high resolution because it's translucent. And so the relationship between information and noise, so noise is the data you don't want and information is the data you do want, was out of balance, and there was more noise than information. We re-recorded it in 2016 using photogrammetry, which is what's happening on the top left. We rematerialized it in 2017, but this is a 3D visualization of the tomb, and of the sarcophagus, and our original intention was to make it with blue infill, to get people to understand what this object was when it went into Soane's collection. But the truth is, technology gave us an opportunity, because I was working with a company called OSE, who are now part of the Canon Group, who were developing what is called elevated printing. It's high-resolution elevated printing that could actually make the low relief of the sarcophagus with the color of the marble. And so with my team deeply resisting, because no one had ever done this and we had very little time to finish it, we improvised, and I love the kind of improvisation of making, to make an exact facsimile of the sarcophagus. And it's still, to me, one of those things. This is a work of art. I mean, it's breathtaking. I loved watching people in the museum and that moment of horror as people tapped it and realized it's plastic, and the complete surprise as you shouldn't be touching in a museum, but one of the things that some of the normal museum practice was starting to break. And when it was on show, we showed it with the complete text. So it has the Book of Gates, the text of the Book of Gates around the outside. And so the text was unwrapped on the wall in blue with a translation of the text. And the text, if any of you get a chance to read it, is breathtaking. I mean, it's really the core text behind all the Abrahamic religions. It's an extraordinary text. But the work we're doing is academic as well as educational or entertaining. We're working very closely with the University of Basel, and the University of Basel has discovered in the rubble around the tomb 5,000 fragments that were removed from inside the tomb. Fragments, I always think something about this big. The biggest fragments they've got are about this big. So some of the fragments are large and some of them are very small. Working with the team from the University of Basel, we're trying to help them piece all these fragments back together. So there's a campaign to record, to 3D scan the fragments, to analyze them with intelligent computer vision software, and to relocate them. This is one column face that is more advanced than the others, but I think something very exciting is starting to happen in terms of putting all the fragments back. We've now recorded all the known fragments of the two rooms we've done in museums around the world. So that's now an archive that's in one place. Moving through, this is in a way like Factum's workshop. So this is trying to explain the technologies. It's trying to explain elevated printing, 3D scanning. So there were 3D scanning displays going on. There were videos. There was a strange nod to the way John Soane showed things. So if anyone goes to Factum, it doesn't look like a fab lab. It looks like an old-style workshop packed with things and experimentation. And this is trying to work out how to make the sarcophagus, how to print the data. There's a lot of film, so there's a little film room where people can go and sit quietly. There's about 3 hours of film from the BBC documentary to others explaining the work that was going on. And then we wanted a transition. So my favorite quote that everyone in Factum knows I bore them with nearly every day is that tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. And for me, it's exactly what museums should be doing. They shouldn't be worshipping ashes. They should be nurturing the complex stories that bring ideas alive and make them burst into metaphorical flame. But the last part of the exhibition is the facsimile. You're actually now in the courtyard. We're inside a tent in the courtyard of the Antiken Museum in Basel. And you walk into the Hall of Beauties as it is now. The only difference is that health and safety insisted we didn't have an uneven floor. So we had to put in a floor with some subtle lighting. I wanted the lighting to be as close as it is in the tomb. So I wanted people who know this tomb to actually know they're in a space where everything has been treated equally. So the resolution of the data recorded of the graffiti on the ceiling is recorded with the same attention to detail as the relief information about the figures. The way we work with colour is completely obsessive. And for me, actually getting accurate colour reproductions is the real challenge. But I wanted people to feel, having seen the reconstruction at the beginning, to actually feel what's happened over 200 years in the name of preservation, and to start thinking about how these tombs are going to survive for the next generation in a world of over 7 billion people who can travel freely, who want to see these things. So can we actually create a new pact between visitors, cultural tourists, and original objects that will enhance the experience of the visitor while preserving the original object? And I will argue and do that this is one model, that actually people don't want to be destroying these tombs, they want to be understanding them. And the great prejudice that still is in many people's minds is this idea that if they don't see the original object, they've been deprived some aspect of its voice, its aura. What I hope you can see is in an environment like this, a large part of the aura has migrated into the copy. And European values about originality differ from those in most other parts of the rest of the world. And I think it's a lesson that we need to learn from China, from the Arab countries, that copying is a way of deepening our understanding of the great works of the past. So you move through this. There's a couple of spaces where there's no colour. We left them like that because our permit ran out, and because of the security situation in Egypt, we weren't able to get back in time to re-record the colour. But as you move through this space, you are in the environment of the tomb of Seti I. So, how am I doing for time? Can I make it? Okay, so to conclude, I want to really think about how visualizations of digital data and materializations of data can work hand in hand to bring a vast new audience to understand the importance of museums all over the world. In Oxford at the moment, there's a rather wonderful, in the Bodleian Library, a rather wonderful small exhibition. It's a one-room exhibition, which is attracting enormous visitor numbers, partly because of its subject. So it's an exhibition of drawings by Tolkien relating to all his books, but particularly, of course, to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I'm working with the Bodleian on a number of projects. I'm not going to go into them now, but my favourite is recreating the great world atlas by Al-Idrisi, often referred to as the Book of Roger, which was made in the 12th century and is the first complete world map. It was 2 meters across, engraved on a silver tray. And while I was talking to them, they said, Adam, the drawings are very beautiful, Tolkien's drawings, but we need something that will get the audience inside Tolkien's head. So I sat down with my team back in Madrid and we dreamt up this rather wonderful, spectacular display that has become the sort of most talked about point in the exhibition. It's about 2 meters 20 by 1 meter 50. It's a relief map of Middle-earth based on Tolkien's relatively accurate topographic drawings, because actually creating Middle-earth was an important part of the story, and he carried a map of Middle-earth in his pocket and kept annotating it. So we made a topographic map in a translucent material. It has a back projection and a front projection, and it basically takes you through a lot of the stories and a lot of the journeys that the different characters go. Sometimes it breaks down into a beautiful abstract thing as the clouds move across and the shadows of the mountains play. At other times it can be a map, and at the other times it can be covered in contour lines with moving lines explaining where the different characters go. But I think the big talk about virtual reality, mixed realities and augmented realities are something that is very much up in the air. People talk about online entertainment and offline entertainment. Museums are offline entertainment, but they can use online tricks. But there's a sort of a strange perversion to try and do things that people can do better at home in a museum. So there's a lot of discussions I hope all of you will have about what should happen in a museum with technology, what's useful in a museum space, and what can be done better by digital natives in their bedrooms. A project that's ongoing and very, very close to my heart began 2 years ago when I sent two of my team, Alex Peck and Ferdinand Someris-Smith, to Nigeria, to the Cross River State, to record the icon monoliths and build a new three-dimensional documentation of these incredibly important African sculptures. When we got there, the first thing that happened was the chiefs started telling us about the removal of stones, the theft of stones. A lot happened in the late 60s and early 70s during the Biafran Civil War. Thank goodness it's another example of great documentation. A man called Philip Allison had photographed many of the stones that were published in 1968. So we know the stones that were on site at that time. The chiefs told us that the top half of this stone, which we recorded on site, was in a famous museum. Within 24 hours, we'd found it. It was in the Met. It went into the Met in 1994. The Met have been incredibly positive and are working with us so they allowed us to record the top half of the stone. We've since recorded 4 other stones in Quai Branly and private collections. We went back and talked again to the chiefs, and we're now building an oral history about when the helicopters visited, because that's when the stones were taken. So there's a very interesting narrative emerging out of the movement of objects. So it's never as simple as people think. The stones that remained on site are being destroyed by farming practice because the forest is being cleared, they're growing cassava, and they burn off the cassava, and the black granite explodes in the heat, so they're losing a lot of the surface. The big challenge is, can we get the local leaders to understand their future lies in the preservation of these stones, and can we communicate the importance of these stones? Not all objects that are articulate are man-made. This is December. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I'm very happy to talk to anyone about it after. I sent a team to the north of Pakistan, 15 miles from the Afghan border, where our guards were entirely Taliban. We were working with the Museum of Natural History in Islamabad to record a sauropod trackway that had been discovered during the making of a road that's about to be destroyed. There's now a wonderful controversy because the paleontologists we've been talking to in England say they're not dinosaur tracks, and the paleontologists in Pakistan say they are. We're now about to uncover another bit, and if the tracks go where Malkani, our paleontologist in Islamabad, predicts they'll be, then we definitely have a dinosaur track. And I think the data, this kind of high-resolution data, is critical for our understanding and communication of the past. So in Venice, we're working with the Fondazione Giorgio Cini and École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne to build a centre devoted to high-resolution recording and intelligent computer vision analysis of data. So this scanner you're seeing here, the audience at the time was there as we just finished recording 1 million, the complete phototeca of the Cini, 1 million double-sided documents. So there was the photos were stuck onto card with notes on the back. In 11 months, we recorded 800,000 A3 double-sided images at 1:1 at 700 dpi, automatically downloaded all the data, and the software analyzed the manuscript, the handwriting on the back, with a 96% accuracy. It's breathtaking. I mean, one of the things we discovered was 7% of the archive was miscatalogued in the first place. So many of the things had got lost. But what you can start to do, and this is really Warburg's dream. So the Warburg Institute in London, and when Warburg began in Hamburg, he used to have 2 epidioscopes. So Warburg began with technology, projecting images from books that could be compared side by side. What Frederick Kaplan and the team at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne are doing are writing analytic software that can start to build things that resemble Warburg's planche. This will change art history, and it already is. So I can start to tell you some of the things that are happening. In Venice, next year, we're working on a pavilion for the indigenous people. So we've been working with Takuma Kikuru, who's one of the Kikuru tribe in Upper Jingu, who's a great artist. And so at the beginning, I said I worked with contemporary artists. Takuma's one. So we work with Takuma just like I would work with Anish Kapoor or Marina Abramovich. He tells me what he wants. We constantly try and find the technologies or build the technologies that can give him the output, the physical output, the virtual output. He's a filmmaker more than anything else. So we're going to build an oca in the garden of the Knights of Malta in Venice. And part of the great joy of my life was 2 months ago, I know Venice very well, but 2 months ago I discovered a 1 hectare garden 5 minutes from St. Mark's and 5 minutes from the Arsenale that had never been used for the Biennale. Very quickly to wrap up, a lot of the things are about how you rethink museums. So the project, this bell, Wenzel Jamnitzer's so-called Cellini bell, because in England everything that was beautifully cast and complex was attributed to Cellini, but this is actually made by Wenzel Jamnitzer in the 16th century in Nuremberg. Jamnitzer is one of the heroes of Factum because he invented effectively three-dimensional modeling in 1568. So from a plan and an elevation, he could make any complex form. He was a great goldsmith, and he worked out how to cast animals and grasses in gold and silver. The Jamnitzer bell, as you can see here, is tiny. We did macro photogrammetry, and we've captured not every detail, but we're down to the eyelid on the newt that was cast from life. And for me, this is incredibly exciting. This is one of the objects. We've now made 35 objects that are in Strawberry Hill House in London, which was the home of Walpole, of Horace Walpole. All the objects, the house was restored about 10 years ago, and all the objects had been sold off. So bit by bit in museums around the world, we're making exact facsimiles that are going back, and hopefully Strawberry Hill House in 50 years' time will start to look like Sir John Soane's museum, filled with things of extraordinary import. But because bells are rather topical, and I think in a way this is probably where I'm going to end. The big crusading campaign at the moment, so I have to talk about it wherever I go, is the oldest manufacturing company in England, the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, closed down last year. It was bought by a property developer who wants to turn it into a large restaurant and boutique hotel. This is 500 years of manufacturing history that's about to be lost. So there's a big campaign being started to prove that it is possible and viable to use technology to revitalize bell making and to record all the existing bells in 3 dimensions, their shape, which gives you their sound, and their decoration. Totally by chance, we were working on the Jamnitzer bell at the same time. But I think these synergies happen all the time, and the extraordinary energy and power that's being generated at the moment is something that has the potential to really change cultural heritage management. The big project that alongside the Bell Foundry is an obsession is Factum Frontline Collaboration. We're now going to be working with the Smithsonian, with UNESCO, with the Nimrod Rescue Project, with the University of Mosul, to train high-resolution recording techniques to graduates from Mosul University who can record all the fragments on site in Nimrod, use the computer vision software to reconstruct. Does it solve the iconoclastic destruction of 2016 in Nimrod? No. But it helps us regroup the things that have been destroyed. And if you think back, it's us who's destroying the Valley of the Kings. So the Valley of the Kings was perfect 200 years ago. So what we want people to start thinking is, well, the tomb of Seti I was perfect 200 years ago, sorry. But we want people to start thinking, what role do you all play in the preservation of the past? Thank you. If anyone has any questions, I'm very happy to take them. Silence. So quietly, I'm very happy to answer anyone privately if there's no one who wants to do it publicly. Thank you very much.